breaks and floods my place, replacing my stuff is
Today radio program. We're coming to you from the Peacock Alley in Bismarck, North Dakota, the downtown business district of North Dakota, Bismarck, North Dakota. We have with us this evening for the second half hour of the first hour of our show, we have Mr. Troy Coons, who's the vice chairman of the Northwest Landowners Association. They've been active on landowner issues during the legislative session. Landowner relationships with oil companies and such. We also have with us Mr. Frank J. Babendick, who's, I think it's fair to say, is a legendary landman in North Dakota. He's been in the business for a long time, and Mr. Babendick, I think we were talking to Attorney General Wayne Stenjum earlier, and he mentioned you were talking about how old you are. You said you were 83 years old.
I will be 83 here this summer.
I was going to mention,
God willing.
I was going to mention that Mr. Babendick shook my hand and darn near crushed it. He's if I can have that kind of tensile strength when I'm 82 years old, I'm going to be a happy fella. Anyway, Mr. Coons, we're close to the end of the legislature. At least I think we're 2 weeks away at least. We have a maximum number of 80 days, and we're almost to 70 in the day count of the legislature. And I just want you to talk about what your organization has been able to get accomplished during this session.
We've worked, I guess we come with 7 bills, and we were helpful in some other bills as well. The ones that have moved forward would be the setback bill that moves the flares, tank batteries, and treaters further away from a home than in the past. Also, in the mediation, to put a little more teeth in that so that people have a place to go before they go to an attorney. It has a great success rate. It's at 88%. There's been 25 different instances over the last 17 months, I believe it is. So that's doing well. We also we're working towards a reclamation bill for the new construction and try to set some standards and such. That has been killed. We were looking for a study bill as well. That didn't move forward. There was a bill, and it did move forward for old reclamation of back to 1982 for tank batteries and things that are there. It's a $75 million fund. Plus, in that, they can put the fines and fees so it can grow beyond that or replenish itself. That's moving forward, and that's kind of where we're at as of today.
What would you describe it as a successful session?
Yes.
What would you?
Yes. You know, it's an ongoing education and negotiation. What
have you learned since you started this? Started in this business of like hanging around the legislature and trying to convince them of the rightness of your cause?
They've got a lot on their plate. You've got to. It takes a lot of time, a lot of effort. There's just so much going on. Some of the things we were dealing with were very large, and we're moving before we were in front of them. So it's going to take something to get it under control.
Mr. Babendick, you're a certified professional landman, and can you tell us what does a landman do? What's the job?
A landman wears many hats across the country. Sometimes he may be negotiating pipeline right-of-way from surface owners. Sometimes he may be obtaining oil and gas leases from mineral owners. Other times he may be in the courthouse determining mineral ownership or clearing up title defects that they have uncovered in the title chain, moving from the patent on to the current owners, and they have to try and clarify any shortcomings in the title. They also do negotiate contracts amongst companies or individuals as far as drilling agreements, bottom and hole and dry hole agreements. They work on units involving federal fee, state lands to get wells drilled. They work with different governmental agencies, the state, federal, and BIA. So they wear a lot of hats, and a lot of companies required that a landman must have a law degree before they would hire them. Other companies felt that they only required a college degree for their new employees because they would teach them along the way what they felt were required to do the jobs that were at hand.
Your card says you're a certified professional landman. How does one become certified?
Generally, American Association of Professional Landmen is an international organization. It's comprised of company and independent oil landmen across the continent, and they have to take certain tests and exams and do a lot of studies, and they also have to maintain, like a lot of other professions, upgrade their certification annually to get so many credits so they can maintain their certification.
What makes a good landman, sir?
A person must like a lot of people and involvements and be self-motivated, because a lot of times you're either working alone or out in the country, or you're with so many different entities. You're working with either company personnel or independent, or you're working with local landowners or attorneys or bankers. So I'd say a good qualification is that you have to be hardworking, honest, and loyal to who you're representing.
And do landmen typically are they typically contractors that work for various companies, or are they employees of companies? How does that work?
They are both. All major companies have a land department, and we're just like they have Independent Petroleum Association, where you'll have the geologists or engineers or landmen, legal. And so companies have landmen. There are sometimes a law firm may have some landmen to do a lot of their courthouse work and contract work. And then there are independents. And there's two types of independents. One type may primarily represent companies, large and small, and act as their agent in different areas across the country, where the company doesn't really have the full employment focused, ready to be able to go to different areas, and they can send a contract landman to do that. Other landmen basically are kind of almost independent operators. They will acquire their own leases or mineral properties and participate in wells and put together prospects and try and promote the drilling of wells.
What did you do? What path did you take?
Well, I got out of college in 1952, and I went to work for a major corporation when we had that early boom in Bismarck, North Dakota. And every major corporation practically had a full staffed office here with geological, land, engineering, geophysical, and accounting office. And I went to work for a company here in Bismarck. After about 2 years, drilling results weren't very good in the state, and so a lot of them started leaving, and my brother-in-law happened to work for Standard of Indiana, and he said, gee, if you may be wanting different employment, they're looking for someone in Casper, Wyoming. So I went down and I did a little bit of negotiating with the company, and they wanted to hire me, and so I moved down to Casper, Wyoming with actually it was Stanley Oil and Gas Company, they called themselves. That was the exploration branch for Standard of Indiana.
Okay.
And I traveled around. I was in Casper, Wyoming for 3 years, went down to Denver, came back up to Bismarck for another 3 years, went to Billings for a short time, and then back down to Casper for another 3 years, and got tired of moving. They were a great company, but I'd left to come back to Bismarck. My wife and I are both from here, so we thought we'd rather raise our family here and not be moving every 2 years. Our daughter had been in like 6 schools in 6 years, so we thought that was not going to end either. They continually were moving people up and transferring you around, and I thought it might be nice to be a little more permanent.
And so what happened then? You came back to Bismarck, and what did you do?
Well, I was going to get into a different line of work, but a lot of company people, it's kind of like a fraternity. The different employees, we knew a lot of all the major company people and independents, and they all started calling me to represent them to do their work up here. And it wasn't like a month after I'd left the company that I was fully engaged in doing land work, contract land work for other independents or for major oil corporations. And my former company had me do all of their work for as long as I was brokering up here.
What did you like about your work?
It was very rewarding in that there was a lot of interaction with people, and I enjoy people, and the landowners out in the country were just incredibly neat people. I never met I ran into thousands, and it would be like a count on one hand, like a one or something, where you'd ever find somebody that you really didn't think was a nice person. They were great. You wanted, if you could have every one of us a next door neighbor. And I enjoyed working with the people. I thought it was interesting to go back in and check the land titles from inception for the patents on to current and follow the different ownerships and mortgages and leases and things of that nature. And
so you enjoyed tracing the history of property ownership?
Yes, that was very exciting. And then if there was a defect you found in the title, then you could work up the different curative type instruments to correct the deficiencies in the title and go out and get different people. You worked with a lot of the bankers and once in a while with the attorneys. And you traveled around back and forth meeting with your clients, whether they were in Denver or Casper or Dallas or Houston. And I enjoyed the travel. I always hated the Monday mornings if I had to go out of town. But once I got out of town, it was just very, very enjoyable. I didn't spend much time hauling golf clubs around or fishing gear or spending times in the bars. When I was out in the country, I just worked from the time I woke up. I went out in the country until it was time to go to bed. And it was just, to me, very exciting and rewarding.
Did you negotiate many leases?
Thousands of leases in my career.
And how did you go about doing that? What's sort of the, how do you, I mean, you're wanting to negotiate a lease with me. What kind of approach do you take normally?
Well, it depends on if you're a businessman or if you were a local farmer or an attorney or banker. All of them might own mineral interest and some are non-residents, but you always found something that might be of interest to the person you're going to contact, and you always approached them with a cheerful, positive attitude, and you always had to be honest. You didn't know who the next guy down the road might be, whether it was a brother-in-law or whether it was a cousin or somebody, and these people communicate all the time, so it was always telling a straight story and meeting them and explaining the benefits that they could derive out of signing an oil and gas lease covering the mineral interest they own.
What do you follow the legislature that much anymore?
I don't anymore. I used to testify before different House or Senate committee meetings that
on what subjects?
Covering oil and gas related legislation, and I kind of got away from that the last 20 years, I suppose. But I was very active in that quite a while ago. I went around to the state and I'd talk at different Kiwanis clubs or at the colleges. You might talk to the different commerce departments and things like that, disseminating information about the oil business.
What do you think about the state of the oil business in North Dakota? And I guess I kind of debated how to ask you this question, but I'll just ask it this way. Do you think that the oil industry in North Dakota has too much power, too much influence?
I want to state first that I'm a strong proponent of what is happening as far as the discovery of being able to get the oil out of the different Bakken and Three Forks formations by virtue of this new technique that they've been utilizing. And basically, I think it's been extremely beneficial to the state. There's more positives than negatives. Unfortunately, there's always some negatives that go along with the positive. And I grew up back in the 30s and 40s, and even after that, the cry amongst the North Dakota citizenry was always, how can we stop the exodus of our citizens? Why can't the families be able to stay here and keep the family business going on Main Street? And the kids always had to leave to find a decent job. There was never any in a little town. If a farmer retired and he moved to a small town, Ray, North Dakota is an example, or Stanley, or Watford City even, and when they passed away, they boarded up that house. There wasn't anyone that was moving in. A business closed up on Main Street, they closed it up. And finally, something came along and it looks like it's on a very permanent basis. We've found a situation where an industry can come in here, employ a lot of people. Natives that moved, left the state, are coming back, finding very good jobs. They're happy to be back. They don't necessarily like the pressure of all the extra people, but they'd rather be back here than down in Denver, Minneapolis, or New York or someplace. But it's been a very positive influence to have an active oil industry that looks like it's going to keep going for generations, and it's helped the population. Unfortunately, you always have some bad apples come in, and they can spoil it for the majority of the good ones. And I'm talking about employees that are looking for, or just people come in here to look for work. We find that the crime rate's up a little bit in the oil patch area. But also some of the companies aren't the best neighbors to have up here. They think we're a bunch of uneducated, dumb bibs, maybe, and they have a tendency to want to run over us somewhat. And I think that is happening, and they're spoiling it for the good companies that are concerned about their public relations and their images. But that just comes with the territory, I guess.
I mean, do you think that surface landowners are being treated well as, a person who owns the surface rights but doesn't own the mineral rights? I mean, they have the presence of the oil industry on their land perhaps, and maybe they don't benefit that much from it. I mean, do you think that these folks are treated fairly by the state?
Years ago, when a lot of our legislation regulating whether you had to pay a surface owner a certain amount of damage, because basically the mineral estate takes priority over the surface estate as far as development, as long as you don't destroy the surface estate. So the surface owner is somewhat helpless. And we did pass certain legislation that's supposed to give them a fair shot at a reasonable compensation for damages. But if you or I were out living in the most active area of the oil development right now, didn't own any minerals, just owned a nice little cow-calf mixed farm operation, and there's thousands of trucks going by your place every day, and they're tearing up your roads, they're creating a constant cloud of dust that settles over your pastures and your croplands, and then they come and drill a well on your land, and you're paid, I don't feel, quite enough compensation probably for the inconvenience. This really upsets the family's normal way of living, and they're kind of really put out to dry, I think. And there's been numerous
What do we do about this?
There's been numerous bills coming along saying, well, I think maybe the mineral owner should be forced to give the surface owner some mineral rights that they have so that the surface owner will benefit. But those aren't really the proper approach. I just think maybe the surface owner needs to be compensated a little bit better by a company through all this disruption.
You mentioned you've negotiated thousands of leases. How difficult would it be for you to negotiate leases now with a situation where you've got in the Bakken where you've got fairly much assured production almost in a certain area of the state, and maybe folks know a lot more about what their leases are worth and can kind of drive a hard bargain perhaps?
Well, I think primarily you're just subject to the conditions that you're encountering out there. If the average lease bonus is X dollars and the average royalty rate is X percent and the average term is so many years, you're going to have to pretty much belly up and pay what the going rate is and negotiate out other terms of the lease, maybe as far as damage settlements and things of that nature, and maybe even what the company might earn as far as rights down to certain depths that they prove to be productive. And
I understand that you helped Mr. Coons with one of the Northwest landowners' bills. It had to do with when activity is deemed to have started on a lease. And
right.
could you explain what you thought about that bill and what you think the issue is and its urgency?
Well, I'd been in the business for 60 years, and I worked for different major companies. I worked as an employee, and I represented numerous majors, and I acquired leases on my own account with other independents over the years, and it was always understood that you took an oil and gas lease, and it stated for how many years that lease was to run, and it was always understood within the industry. And this is not just North Dakota, because I've called fellows in the last 6 months or a year, whether you're in Wyoming, where I lived and was a member of their Landmen's Association. I was an officer when I was down there. I was in the Denver Association, and I spent a lot of time in Dallas, Fort Worth areas. The general consensus always among landmen and company people was that you had to have a rig on that location with a bit in the ground turning to the right to maintain and hold that lease beyond the expiration term, unless you had previous production on it. And all of a sudden the companies decided, well, we are going to explore the possibility that maybe we'll play with these words. And so when we say commence drilling operations, it doesn't mean that you have to have a rig out there. It maybe means that you could tow an old pickup out there, and if it had a shovel in the box or a rake and parked it on the location, that would mean that you'd commenced your drilling operations. And that just isn't the way it has ever been thought of within the industry people. But some of these creative attorneys are trying their best to maintain the leases for their client company, see? And this has created a lot of problems out in the oil field. If you go check county records and try and determine who owns valid leases, you can't do it by the county records anymore. And then match up to see if there's a well that's been drilled and producing by going to the Industrial Commission in the state. Right now, they're claiming that if you park a piece of equipment out on that location, that they can hold the lease. Well, this House bill that came out, 1355, was one of the worst pieces of legislation I had seen relative to oil and gas. It stated, amongst other things, that if within 45 days of the expiration of that lease, so 45 days after the 3-year or 1 year or 5-year term had expired, they could move a drilling rig, on the location.
Mr. Bavendick, I'm sorry, we're going to have to cut you off. Maybe we can have you back in the future to discuss this at more length. But we've been talking to Mr. Frank Bavendick. He's a professional landman and kind of a legend in the landman community in North Dakota, and Troy Coons, the director of the Northwest Landowners Association.
The Legislature Today is brought to you in part by Prairie Outpost Log Homes.